Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. My name's Ryan, and in today's video we will be doing a little bit of silicone rendering. So what is silicone render? Well, silicone render is basically a modern alternative to traditional sand, cement and lime based renders. They're highly engineered, which means they're highly waterproof, very flexible to prevent cracking, vapor permeable, polymer based to maximise adhesion to the substrate, and they are through coloured, which means you can select the colour before rendering and the render comes pre-coloured, so you never need to paint it once complete. This makes them ideal for somebody who's looking for a durable and low maintenance render. So there's many different types of silicone render out there, many different brands. For this particular project we decided to go with the Ecorend SR15 silicone thin coat render system. So before we actually applied the base coat, these walls were primed with Ecorend S10 bonding primer, which is a polymer based primer which really grips hold of the substrate and creates a perfect surface for the base coat to adhere to. The surface of this outbuilding that we're rendering onto is concrete pebledash panels. Now while these aren't ideal, with the pebbles being so secure after we've knocked off all the loose ones on this building, pebledash is actually a fantastic key due to its roughness in texture. There's plenty of surface area there, so once the base coat is bonded to it, it's going to be very secure. So it was a real sunny day, nice and hot. This is about as hot as you want to go with this product. I think 30 is the limit, 30 degrees Celsius, but really you don't want to go any hotter than that. And if you can, try to keep out of the walls out of direct sunlight. So the base coat that we're using is the Ecorend X32 one coat base. It's a cement based base coat that's been polymer modified, which is what gives it its improved adhesion, waterproof properties and breathability. It's designed to be applied to surfaces that have been primed with the S10 bonding primer that we mentioned earlier. So even though this is called a one coat render, and that's what it is, it's just a single coat render. It doesn't have to be left multiple days between the coats for it to cure. So you put two passes on, which is, it looks like you're putting two coats on, but technically you're basically just putting one thick coat on in two stages. So what you're seeing here is me applying the first pass. Once this passes on, you can see the mesh just waiting there just by the side of me. We're going to apply a layer of mesh, embed it into the render, and then apply the second pass and bring it up level with the beads. So what we're doing now is just using a serrated straight edge to basically rule off the wall. We're removing the high points, and also because it's serrated, it kind of reveals where the low points are by not marking them. So what you do is then apply more render to the areas that has not been filled properly, as you can see me doing now, and then we go over it again until it's all nice and evenly marked. The reason we use a serrated rule rather than just using a standard feather edge or straight edge is because the serrated edge actually allows the air, if there is any trapped beneath the render, to be released. So here we're just applying the mesh, just embedding it into the render. Mesh really has become a staple of the modern renders. There's not many that don't actually have some sort of meshing process. It's just a fibrous mesh, very similar to Scrim tape, which you'd normally put over the joints of plasterboards if you're skimming. So it's the same stuff, it just comes in a giant roll, and it's essentially just reinforces the plaster. And now that that mesh is embedded, we can start applying the second pass. This time we're going to fill out right to the beads, almost using the beads as a bit of a guide. And you can try and get it a little bit flat, but don't worry too much because we're going to have to rule it off again anyway. With render, you don't really use the trowel to get a flat finish as much as you just use the trowel to apply it to the wall. You use a rule to get the flat finish, which is what we'll do in a moment. So that's the wall, relatively flat at this point. It's all ruled pretty much as flat as we're going to get it, so now all that's left to do is to get it, the rule lines out. I'm just using a large flat spatula, just applying some pressure to it and just going over the wall with it. It's a pretty large spatula, as you can see, and that just helps me get a nice smooth wall there, so when I come to sponge it down later, I'm working with a much smoother surface. And here just applying a little bit of detail that the customer requested. Just a little curve at the bottom to help the water run off. So that's it, let's start this process all over again. I'm going to speed this up for you just so you don't have to sit right through all this. This is going to be pretty fast, but it's the same process. Basically this first pass is just going to fill out the pebledash and add a little bit of thickness to it. We'll rule it off, embed the mesh, and then top it off. The topping off on this is easy because you've got the two beads so close together, you can just put a little rule across there and lift it up, basically just drag it level. When we're embedding the mesh as well, it's worth remembering whenever you've got a door or window, the top corners just above, the top two corners above the door want a little bit of extra reinforcement, because when the door's opening and closing, they're going to be the weak points, and if you're going to get cracks, that's where it's going to be, so usually best to apply a little bit extra mesh in those areas. So this particular render system should be applied in two 5mm passes, bringing you to a total thickness of 10mm. The PVC beads that we've got are 10mm thick, so we just use them as a bit of a guide, but we got them from the Render Bead Company, by the way, a bit of a shout out. Great little company. So obviously going over pebledash, this is going to be a little bit thicker than the recommended 10mm, but it is what it is. And if anyone's wondering, the angle beads are just stuck on with a bit of base coat that we mixed up before we started. So that's the wall, a little bit of a sponge later. They've just been rubbed in sort of circular motion with a sponge just to get that decently flat finish. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to be applying the silicone finish over the top of this, so this is basically just it's a flat wall and then it's sort of keyed with the sponge just to give it a little bit of texture, and that's what we will apply our silicone render to once it's dry. Okay, hopefully that last bit wasn't too intense, but we did have a lot to get through, so can't be a good old montage. Anyway, what you can see is applying now is the Ecorend SP15 Silicone primer, and this particular colour is marble white. Now the primer and the thin coat render do have to be the same colour, just to guarantee that the colour runs all the way through the render. And speaking of the thin coat render, there she is. So this is the Ecorend SR15 Silicone thin coat render, again in marble white. Now the thin coat render contains a 1.5mm aggregate, which is how you determine the thickness. It's also what gives it the texture. So you want to apply it to 1.5mm thick, so basically using the aggregate as a guide to the thickness, and then you give it a little rub up with the plastic float you can see me using there, and that's what gives it its pattern and texture. On this particular job, the ground that was stood on had just been slabbed recently, so it was very nice little patio that had been just laid. This particular part of the thin coat render is very sticky and very messy, so you want to really go out of the way to protect things and sheet up, because it's just not worth risking it. Do yourself a favour and get those sheets down. So on a hot day and in direct sunlight, this stuff does not hang around, so you don't have that long really to manipulate it before it starts to get kind of clumpy and a little bit difficult to work with. So what I suggest is put on a small section, rub it up like I'm doing here, and then put on a little more, rub that bit up, and just keep going that way. You can't really rub it up too soon, but you can rub it up too late. So after we'd finished the job, the customer built himself a homemade pizza oven and requested that we render it the exact same way to match the outhouse. So unfortunately we didn't film it all. Here is some photographs of the project. So it was basically, this is with the beads stuck on. He built it himself. It's a really nice little home project, really nice little build. And after we rendered it, this is what it looked like, ready to receive the final silicone render. So a few months later I popped back to film the final job all completed. So here's that. Enjoy.
Thank you for watching the video. Remember to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more plastering videos. See you next time!